The bright lights of the studio shone down on the familiar weathered face of Clint Eastwood. At 94 years old, he still commanded respect whenever he walked into a room. Tonight was supposed to be just another interview on Evening Spotlight with James Carter, a popular talk show where stars came to talk about their latest work. The studio was packed. 300 people sat in the audience, excited to see the Hollywood legend in person. Many had waited months for tickets. Camera operators moved quietly around the edges of the stage, making sure to catch every moment. The air felt electric, with excitement. James Carter, the host with perfect hair and a bright white smile, leaned forward in his chair. He was known for getting stars to open up, but Eastwood was famous for being private. This would be a challenge. So, Mr. Eastwood, your new film The Last Highway is getting amazing reviews. People are saying it might be your best work yet, Carter said, his voice smooth and practiced. Eastwood nodded slightly. The team did good work, he said simply. Carter tried again. You've been directing films for over 50 years now. That's an incredible legacy of leadership in Hollywood. What are your thoughts on leadership in these modern times? Who impresses you these days? The audience expected Eastwood might mention a fellow director, maybe Spielberg or Scorsese. Perhaps he would talk about a political figure, or even avoid the question with one of his famous short answers. Instead, Eastwood was quiet for a moment. He looked down, then straight at Carter with those intense eyes that had stared down countless villains on screen. You know who I think shows real leadership today? Eastwood said slowly. The new Pope, Robert Prevost. There's something about him that reminds me of the kind of quiet strength we need more of. The silence in the studio was sudden and complete. A cameraman nearly dropped his equipment. Carter's professional smile froze on his face. This was the last thing anyone expected to hear from Clint Eastwood. In the control room, the producer Sarah Jenkins spilled her coffee. Did he just mention the Pope? She asked, grabbing a napkin to clean up the mess. Get me everything we have. On Pope Prevost right now. Back on stage, Carter recovered quickly. That's an unexpected choice. Can you tell us more about why Pope Prevost impresses you? Eastwood shifted in his chair. He's not flashy. Doesn't need to be the center of attention. Just does the work that needs doing. Reminds me of the old school values I grew up with. In the third row, Maria Gonzalez, a longtime fan of Eastwood, grabbed her husband's arm. Did you hear that? She whispered. I never knew he followed Catholic leadership. Her husband shrugged. That's what makes him interesting. You never know what he'll say next. Carter sensed there was more to this story. Have you been following Pope Prevost's work closely? Eastwood's face changed slightly, a hint of a smile appearing. You could say that, but it goes back further than his time as Pope. The audience leaned forward. The usual shuffling and coughing had stopped. Everyone sensed they were witnessing something rare. Clint Eastwood about to share a personal story. In the back of the studio, Diane Miller, the network executive who had arranged the interview, was texting frantically to her boss. Something big happening with Eastwood. Talking about the Pope. Rating will spike. Need to extend segment. Carter knew better than to rush Eastwood. He waited patiently as the director gathered his thoughts. It was back in 1991, Eastwood finally said. I was scouting locations in Peru for a film that never got made. Small town in the mountains, beautiful place, simple people living hard lives. The teleprompter that usually guided Carter through interviews was now blank. This was uncharted territory. And you met him there? Pope Prevost? He wasn't Pope then, of course, Eastwood said with a slight chuckle. Just Father Robert, young priest working with the locals. American guy who'd given up a comfortable life to help people who had nothing. In the audience, phones were coming out despite the strict no recording policy. Social media managers for the show decided to let it happen. This moment was too important to stop. Our car broke down outside this small village, Eastwood continued. Middle of nowhere. No hotels, no restaurants, nothing tourists would recognize. Local guy told us to find the church, said the American priest might help. The studio lights seemed to dim, or perhaps it just felt that way as everyone focused completely on Eastwood's words. We found this small stone church. Simple place. And there he was, Father Robert, covered in dust, helping some men repair the roof. Didn't stop working when we approached. Just asked what we needed while hammering away. Carter nodded, completely invested in the story now. What happened then? I explained who we were, what we were doing there. Expected him to get excited about meeting a Hollywood team. Eastwood smiled at the memory. He didn't care at all. Just said we could stay in the church hall if we needed shelter. Then he asked if any of us knew how to fix a roof. Laughter rippled through the audience, breaking the tension slightly. So there I was, Clint Eastwood, up on a church roof in Peru, hammering away next to this priest who had no idea who I was. And honestly, it felt good. Just being useful. No cameras, no fame. In the front row, an older man wiped away a tear. Something about the story was touching people deeply. We ended up staying 3 days, Eastwood said. I watched how Father Robert worked with the people there. He spoke their language, ate their food, treated everyone with respect. Wasn't trying to change them or judge them. Just help where he could. Carter leaned forward. And this is the same man who is now Pope? Eastwood nodded. Same man. I followed his career over the years. Always impressed me how he stayed true to himself. When I heard he was chosen as Pope, I thought, now there's a choice that makes sense. The commercial break. Timer was flashing urgently, but Carter ignored it. The network would forgive the schedule disruption for this golden television moment. Did you ever speak with him again after that time in Peru? Carter asked. Eastwood's eyes twinkled with a hint of mischief. Now that would be telling too much, wouldn't it? Maybe we'll save that for after the break. The audience broke into spontaneous applause as Carter announced they would continue the conversation after a short break. As the commercial started to roll, the studio buzzed with excitement. Behind the scenes, phones were ringing nonstop. News outlets were already picking up the story. Social media was exploding with mentions of Eastwood and the Pope. Sarah Jenkins, the producer, was already planning how to restructure the entire show around this unexpected revelation. Get me anyone who knows anything about Pope Prevost's time in Peru, and see if the Vatican press office is awake. They'll be getting calls about this any minute now. As makeup artists touched up his face during the break, Eastwood sat quietly, seemingly unaware of the storm he had just created. To him, it was just a story about a man he respected. To everyone else, it was the television moment of the year. Finicu, on-air sign would light up again soon, and millions more viewers would be tuning in, eager to hear what else Clint Eastwood had to say about his surprising connection to Pope Robert Prevost. The red on-air light blinked off as the show went to commercial break. The studio, usually calm during breaks, buzzed with excitement. James Carter, still processing what just happened, walked quickly to the edge of the stage where his producer, Sarah Jenkins, waited. Did you know about this? Sarah asked, her eyes wide with surprise. Carter shook his head. Not a clue. This wasn't in any of our pre-interview notes. Across the studio, a young assistant named Miguel was showing his phone to another crew member. Look at this. Twitter is going crazy already. The phone screen showed thousands of new posts appearing every minute with hashtags like Eastwood and the Pope, Clint meets Prevost, and Nice Hollywood Vatican. 10 million views of the clip already, Miguel said, scrolling through his feed. And it's only been 7 minutes since he said it. In the green room, network executive Diane Miller was on the phone with her boss. Yes, sir. Completely unexpected. We're extending the segment. Yes, we've already contacted our religion correspondent to join for the post-show analysis. Ratings? They're through the roof. We've got a 300% spike in viewers just from the first mentions on social media. Back on stage, a makeup artist gently dabbed powder on Eastwood's forehead. The Hollywood legend seemed unbothered by the commotion around him. Would you like some water, Mr. Eastwood? A nervous assistant asked, offering a glass. Thank you, he said simply, taking the water. His calm presence stood in stark contrast to the frenzy around him. In the audience, people ignored the no phones signs as they frantically texted friends and family. You won't believe what's happening at the Eastwood interview I'm attending. Clint knows the Pope personally. Sending you a link to the live stream. Tune in now. Security guards, who would normally stop such behavior, were themselves too interested in what was happening to enforce the rules. 3 rows from the front, Professor Thomas Jenkins from Catholic University answered a call from a colleague. "Yes, I'm here in person," he whispered. "It's incredible. I study Vatican history, and even I had no idea about this connection." Meanwhile, in newsrooms around the country, editors scrambled to catch up with the story. "Get me everything we have on Pope Prevost's time in Peru," shouted Janet Myers, news director at National News Network. "And find anyone who was on movie sets with Eastwood in the early 90s. I want confirmation." At entertainment website CelebWatch, a young reporter named Alex was already typing furiously. "Breaking. Hollywood meets Holy See, Clint Eastwood reveals. Surprising connection to Pope Robert Prevost." In Rome, despite the late hour, lights began turning on at the Vatican press office. Phones rang as reporters sought comment on Eastwood's revelation. Paolo Rossi, the night shift press officer who had been dozing at his desk, suddenly found himself at the center of a media storm. "No, the Holy Father is not available for comment at this hour," he repeated to yet another American journalist. "Yes, we are aware of Mr. Eastwood's comments. No official statement at this time." Back at the studio, the commercial break was ending. The floor director counted down, 5, 4, 3, then pointed silently to Carter as the cameras went live again. "Welcome back to Evening Spotlight," Carter said, his voice slightly higher than usual with excitement. "If you're just joining us, you've picked the perfect time. Hollywood legend Clint Eastwood has just shared a remarkable story about meeting a young priest named Robert Prevost in Peru back in 1991, the same Robert Prevost who is now Pope. Mr. Eastwood, before the break, you left us wondering if you ever spoke with Father Robert again after your time in Peru?" The cameras turned to Eastwood, who nodded slightly. "We exchanged letters for a while," he said. "Nothing fancy, just updates about his work, the people in the village. I sent some money to help finish the church roof properly." In the control room, Director Frank Peterson whispered into his headset, "Camera 3, get a tighter shot of his face. Camera 2, be ready for the host's reaction." "Did Father Robert know who you were by then?" Carter asked. Eastwood chuckled softly. "One of the village kids eventually told him I was in movies. He wrote that he didn't have time for movies but would try to see one someday if he found a theater." The audience laughed, charmed by the humble priest's response to a Hollywood legend. "The last letter I got from him was around 1998, Eastwood continued. "He was being moved to another assignment. Bigger responsibilities. That's how it works in the church, I guess. On phones across America, people were searching Robert Prevost, Peru, 1998, trying to verify the timeline. At her desk in Chicago, religious journalist Maria Rodriguez gasped as she connected the dots. "He's right," she told her editor. Prevost was appointed prior of the Augustinian community in Peru in 1998, his first major leadership role. Eastwood's timeline matches perfectly. Carter leaned forward in his chair. "And you followed his career after that? Even though you weren't in direct contact?" "I'm interested in people who are authentic," Eastwood said. "In my business, you meet a lot of people who are playing a part, on and off screen. Father Robert was the real deal. So yeah, I kept track, read about his work when his name would come up in church news." Outside the studio, a crowd had begun to gather as word spread about what was happening inside. People held up phones, live streaming to friends. We're outside the Evening Spotlight studio where Clint Eastwood is revealing his friendship with the Pope. In homes across America, families who had been doing other things suddenly gathered around screens. In Minneapolis, the Johnson family abandoned their dinner to watch. "Kids, come quick! Clint Eastwood knows the Pope," Mr. Johnson called out. In Seattle, graduate student Emma Chen, who had been studying for finals, got 7 text messages in a row from friends telling her to turn on her TV. Carter, sensing the historical importance of the moment, asked carefully, "Mr. Eastwood, when Robert Prevost was named Pope earlier this year, what was your reaction?" Eastwood looked thoughtful. "I was in my workshop at home doing some woodworking. My daughter called to tell me, said, 'Dad, isn't that the priest you met in Peru?' I had to sit down for a minute." The camera zoomed in as Eastwood's eyes showed a rare glimpse of emotion. It's a funny world, he continued. You meet someone fixing a church roof in a place most people couldn't find on a map, and years later, they're leading 1 billion people. Makes you think about the strange paths life takes. In the audience, several people wiped away tears. In the control room, Sarah Jenkins made a decision. We're canceling the next segment. This is too important. Tell the other guest we'll reschedule. Across social media, the story was evolving by the second. Memes appeared showing Eastwood's famous Western characters alongside the Pope. Amateur artists created quick sketches of a young priest and Eastwood on a church roof. Religious commentator Rabbi David Goldstein tweeted, "What a beautiful story of human connection across different worlds. This is what bridges our divides." As Carter prepared his next question, network phones rang with requests from other news organizations wanting permission to use clips from the interview. The story that had begun as a simple promotional appearance for a new film had transformed into something much more meaningful, a glimpse into an unexpected friendship between two influential men from completely different worlds. And the night was still young. James Carter knew he had a rare opportunity. In his 15 years of hosting Evening Spotlight, he had interviewed hundreds of celebrities, but never had he witnessed a moment like this. Clint Eastwood, a man famous for his privacy, was opening up about a personal connection to one of the most powerful religious leaders in the world. "Mr. Eastwood," Carter said carefully, "you mentioned that you and Father Robert, now Pope Prevost, exchanged letters for some years. But I sense there's more to this story. Did your paths ever cross again in person after Peru?" The studio was completely silent. Even the camera operators held their breath. Eastwood looked down for a moment, then directly at Carter. "Yes, twice." A soft murmur spread through the audience. "The first time was in 2007, Eastwood continued. "I was in Chicago for a film festival. Someone mentioned that Father Robert, by then Bishop Prevost, was giving a talk at a local church about his work with poor communities. I decided to go just to see how he was doing." In her seat, Sarah Jenkins, the producer, frantically searched on her tablet. "Confirmed," she whispered to her assistant. "Prevost was made a bishop in 2003 and was assigned to work in Chicago in 2007. Eastwood was at the Chicago Film Festival that year for Gran Torino. On stage, Eastwood continued his story. I sat in the back of the church, didn't tell anyone who I was, just wanted to listen." "Did he recognize you?" Carter asked. A small smile appeared on Eastwood's weathered face. "Not at first. He gave his talk, simple, honest words about helping people in need. No fancy church language, just straight talk. Reminded me why I respected him in the first place." The cameraman zoomed in slightly, capturing the genuine admiration in Eastwood's expression. After the talk, people lined up to speak with him. I joined the line. When I got to the front, he looked at me for a long moment. Then his eyes got wide. He said, "Mr. Eastwood, the roof repairman from Peru?" The audience laughed warmly at this description of the legendary actor. "We only had a few minutes to talk. He asked about my films. Said he still hadn't seen any, but his nephew was a big fan. Asked me to sign something for the kid." Carter smiled. "So even as a bishop, he was still the same humble man you met in Peru?" "Exactly the same," Eastwood nodded. "No big ego, just a man doing his job." In homes across America, families were now fully invested in this unexpected story. In Boston, the Silva family had called their grandmother to make sure she was watching. In Dallas, a group of friends who had gathered to watch a basketball game had switched to the interview instead. "You mentioned you met him twice," Carter prompted gently. "When was the second time?" Eastwood's face became more serious. "That was in 2019. My son Kyle was performing jazz in Rome. I went to see him play." In the front row of the studio audience, a religious studies professor scribbled notes furiously. This was historical information no one had documented before. "Got word to the Vatican that I was in town," Eastwood said. By then, Prevost had become a cardinal and was working directly with the previous pope. I didn't expect anything to come of it, but the next day, I got a message to come to a small church near the Vatican for early morning mass. The studio lights seemed to dim as everyone focused completely on Eastwood's words. I went alone. The church was empty except for a few old women praying. Then Cardinal Prevost came in through a side door. No fancy robes, just the simple black outfit with the collar. He smiled when he saw me and said, "I hope you've improved your roof repair skills, Mr. Eastwood." Laughter rippled through the audience, breaking the tension slightly. He said mass for the small group of us. Afterwards, we walked in the garden behind the church, just talking like old friends. "What did you talk about?" Carter asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Life. Getting older. The work we still wanted to do before our time was up." Eastwood paused. He told me he missed Peru, missed working directly with people. Said the higher he rose in the church, the more meetings he had to attend and the less time he spent with the people who needed help. In the control room, the network, President had arrived and was watching the monitors with intense focus. "This is television gold," he whispered. "Pure gold." On social media, charring Eastwood Prevost Rome was now trending worldwide. In Peru, local news stations interrupted their programs to report on Eastwood's story about their country's connection to the Pope. "Did you discuss anything else during that meeting in Rome?" Carter asked. Eastwood looked thoughtful. He asked about Hollywood, said he worried about the messages in movies today, asked if I thought films could help bring people together instead of pulling them apart. "And what did you tell him?" Carter leaned forward. I told him I believed in stories that show the truth about people, the good and the bad. That an honest story, even a difficult one, can help people understand each other better. Eastwood paused, then added, "Before we parted, he said something I've thought about many times since. He said, 'Mr. Eastwood, we work in very different worlds, but perhaps we're both just storytellers at heart.'" Several audience members nodded in appreciation of this insight. In Vatican City, despite the late hour, lights were now on in several windows of the papal apartments. The Pope's personal secretary, Father Marco Bianchi, gently knocked on the door of Pope Prevost's study. "Your Holiness, I apologize for the interruption, but there is something you should know about." The Pope looked up from his papers. "What is it, Marco?" "Clint Eastwood is speaking about you on American television. He is telling the story of how you met in Peru many years ago." A look of surprise crossed the Pope's face, followed by a gentle smile. "Ah, Mr. Eastwood, the roof repairman." Back in the studio, Carter asked the question everyone was wondering. "When Cardinal Prevost was elected Pope earlier this year, did you reach out to congratulate him?" Eastwood nodded. "I sent a simple note. Just said I was happy for him, but sorry he'd have even more meetings and less time with people." "Did he respond?" Carter asked. "He did." Eastwood seemed to consider whether to share this private correspondence, then decided to continue. He sent a small note that said, "Thank you, my friend. Pray that I don't forget what we learned on that church roof in Peru." The audience was completely still, many visibly moved by this glimpse into a friendship between two vastly different world figures. In her home in Seattle, retired teacher Grace Williams wiped away tears. "What a beautiful story," she told her husband. "Two men from completely different worlds connected by simple human respect." In the studio, Carter sensed it was time for a break. "We'll continue our extraordinary conversation with Clint Eastwood after these messages," he said to the camera. As the on-air light went off, the audience broke into spontaneous applause. Eastwood nodded slightly in acknowledgement, seemingly unaware of how deeply his story had touched everyone present. In the control room, Sarah Jenkins made a quick decision. "Cancel the rest of tonight's scheduled show. This is all we're doing. Get me religious experts and film historians ready to comment after we finish with Mr. Eastwood." The story that had begun as a simple mention of the Pope had evolved into a touching tale of an unlikely friendship spanning decades and continents. And as the commercial break began, millions of viewers stayed glued to their screens, eager to hear what would come next. While the evening spotlight show was on commercial break, a flurry of activity was happening across the world. In Vatican City, despite it being the middle of the night, the press office was now fully awake and buzzing with activity. Cardinal Giuseppe Rossi, the Vatican's communications director, had been woken up by multiple phone calls. Still in his pajamas with a coat thrown over them, he hurried into the press office where several staff members were watching a live stream of the American talk show. "Is it true? Does the Holy Father really know Clint Eastwood?" asked a young press assistant. Cardinal Rossi adjusted his glasses and watched the screen intently. "We need to prepare a statement, something respectful, but not too detailed, and someone needs to inform the Holy Father immediately." In a small room adjacent to the Pope's private apartments, Father Marco Bianchi showed Pope Robert Prevost clips of the interview on a tablet. The Pope watched quietly, occasionally nodding or smiling slightly. "Your Holiness, the press office is asking if you wish to make a statement," Father Marco said when the video ended. Pope Prevost was silent for a moment. "Mr. Eastwood has always valued his privacy. I should show him the same respect." He paused, then added with a small smile, "But you may tell the press office they can acknowledge that yes, we did meet in Peru, and yes, he was an excellent roof repairman." Back in the studio in America, the on-air light flashed on again. James Carter welcomed viewers back to the show. For those just joining us, we are in the middle of an extraordinary conversation with Clint Eastwood, who has been sharing the story of his decades-long connection with Pope Robert Prevost. The camera turned to Eastwood, who looked relaxed despite the growing commotion around his revelations. "Mr. Eastwood, your story has clearly touched a lot of people," Carter said, gesturing to the audience. "I'm curious, why have you never shared this connection before?" Eastwood shrugged slightly. "Wasn't my story to tell. Robert Prevost earned everything he achieved through hard work and dedication. Didn't want people to think it had anything to do with knowing someone from Hollywood." In living rooms across America, people nodded in appreciation of Eastwood's humble approach. "We're getting reports that the Vatican has just released a statement," Carter said, touching his earpiece. "Let me read it to you. The Holy See acknowledges, with appreciation, the comments made by Mr. Clint Eastwood regarding his encounters with Pope Francis. The Holy Father remembers with fondness his time serving communities in Peru and the many good people he met there. Pope Francis sends his warm regards to Mr. Eastwood and thanks him for his kind words." Carter looked up. "It seems the Vatican has confirmed your story." Eastwood nodded, his expression unchanged. "They're being polite. That's their job." Meanwhile, in news stations around the world, the story was growing. On National News Network, anchor Lisa Chen spoke to viewers. In an unprecedented cultural crossover, Hollywood legend Clint Eastwood has revealed a personal friendship with Pope Robert Prevost that spans over 3 decades. We're joined now by Vatican expert Dr. Michael Collins. Dr. Collins, how unusual is this kind of connection? The split screen showed a professor in a bow tie, nodding seriously. "Highly unusual, Lisa. Pope Prevost has been known as a people's pope since his election, with a focus on serving marginalized communities. This story actually aligns perfectly with what we know about his character and priorities. What's remarkable is that this connection remained private for so long. At the same time, in Peru, local television stations were broadcasting special reports. In Spanish, an excited reporter stood in front of the small mountain church where the story began. Behind me is the very church where Hollywood icon Clint Eastwood and our beloved Pope Robert Prevost first met more than 30 years ago. Local residents are gathering to share their memories of the young American priest who would one day lead the Catholic Church. The camera panned to show a small crowd of villagers, many elderly, holding candles and photographs. One old man, his face, weathered by years of mountain sun, spoke into the microphone. "Father Robert fixed more than just the church roof. He fixed people's lives, and if Clint Eastwood helped him fix our roof, then he is always welcome back in our village." Back in the studio, Carter asked Eastwood, "Your story has touched on something that seems to resonate with people, the idea of connection across different worlds. Why do you think that is?" Eastwood thought for a moment. "People are tired of division, everyone put in boxes. Celebrity or ordinary, liberal or conservative, religious or not. Truth is, we're all just people trying to do our best. Robert and I came from different worlds, but we saw something real in each other. No pretending." In the audience, many people nodded in agreement. Social media was exploding with reactions. Celebrities, religious leaders, and ordinary people were sharing their thoughts. Famous actor Ray Johnson tweeted, "In 50 years in Hollywood, never heard this story. Clint keeps it real, always has." Eastwood Prevost, Bishop Maria Gonzalez posted, "Pope Prevost's humble beginnings and service in Peru shaped his compassionate leadership. Beautiful to hear this story from such an unexpected source." Bridging worlds. In Vatican City, as dawn began to break, Pope Robert Prevost stood at his window, looking out over St. Peter's Square. Father Marco entered the room quietly. "Your Holiness, I apologize for the interruption. Cardinal Rossi is requesting guidance on further statements about Mr. Eastwood's interview." The Pope turned from the window, a gentle smile on his face. "Tell Cardinal Rossi that sometimes a story speaks for itself and needs no official interpretation." After a pause, he added, "And please arrange for a private letter to be sent to Mr. Eastwood. I think I should thank him personally." In the TV studio, the interview was approaching its end. Carter asked one final question. "Mr. Eastwood, has this connection with Pope Prevost influenced your own views on faith or religion over the years?" Eastwood looked thoughtful. "I'm not a religious man in the traditional sense. Never have been. But knowing Robert Prevost showed me what true faith looks like. It's not about rules or power, it's about serving others, standing up for people who can't stand up for themselves. In that way, maybe we're not so different after all." The audience broke into spontaneous applause. As the show prepared to end, Carter turned to the camera. "Tonight, we've been privileged to hear an extraordinary story of an unlikely friendship between two men from vastly different worlds, Hollywood legend Clint Eastwood and Pope Robert Prevost. It's a reminder that human connection can transcend the boundaries we so often place between us." Outside the studio, a crowd had gathered despite the late hour. News trucks lined the street, and reporters did live broadcasts from the sidewalk. "The impact of tonight's revelation is still unfolding," said one reporter speaking into a camera. "But what began as a simple promotional interview for Eastwood's new film has become a cultural moment that has people around the world talking about friendship, respect, and the unexpected connections that shape our lives." Inside his dressing room after the show, Eastwood sat quietly while the sounds of excitement continued outside. His phone rang, his daughter calling to tell him he had just broken the internet. The simple mention of Pope Robert Prevost had turned into something much bigger than anyone could have expected. And as morning approached, the story was only beginning to spread. The morning after Clint Eastwood's remarkable interview, people around the world woke up to the story. It was on every news channel, newspaper front page, and social media feed. What had begun as a casual mention of Pope Robert Prevost had become the most talked about moment in recent television history. At his home in California, Eastwood sat on his porch with a cup of coffee, looking out at the sunrise. His phone had been ringing constantly since he left the studio, but he had decided not to answer. The story wasn't about him, he felt. It was about something bigger. His daughter came outside and sat beside him. "Dad, you've created quite a stir," she said, showing him her phone with headlines about the interview. Eastwood smiled slightly. "Didn't mean to, just answered a question honestly. The studio says they've had calls from every major news outlet in the world. Everyone wants a follow-up interview." "Not interested," Eastwood said simply. Said what I had to say. Across the ocean in Rome, Pope Robert Prevost began his day with early morning prayers. When he finished, Cardinal Rossi was waiting for him with a thick folder of press clippings. "Your Holiness, Mr. Eastwood's interview has created worldwide interest in your early work in Peru. Many publications are requesting more information about your time there." The Pope took the folder and leafed through it slowly. "It seems Mr. Eastwood has done more to highlight the needs of the poor in Latin America with one interview than I have with many speeches. How would you like us to respond, Your Holiness?" Pope Prevost thought for a moment. "This is an opportunity to redirect attention where it belongs, not on a friendship between two public figures, but on the communities that still need our help. Prepare a statement focusing on the ongoing work in Peru and similar regions. In the village in Peru where the story began, something unexpected was happening. Tourists and journalists began arriving, all wanting to see the church with the famous roof. The current priest, Father Miguel, found himself suddenly thrust into the spotlight. "Yes, this is the same church," he told a group of reporters. "And, yes, we still need help. Our medical clinic needs supplies, our school needs books. If this attention brings support to our community, then it is truly a blessing." By midday, 3 international aid organizations had already contacted Father Miguel, offering assistance for the village. Back in America, religious and cultural experts were analyzing the significance of the Eastwood-Prevost connection. On the E.A. popular talk show Morning Views, host Rachel King spoke with Professor Sarah Cohen from Harvard Divinity School. "What makes this story so powerful, Professor Cohen?" "It breaks all our expectations," Professor Cohen explained. "We don't expect a Hollywood tough guy and a pope to connect as regular people. We don't expect a famous actor to spend time fixing a church roof in a remote village. And we certainly don't expect such a meaningful relationship to remain private. For over 30 years in our age of constant sharing." Rachel nodded. "Do you think this will impact how people view either Pope Prevost or Clint Eastwood?" "Absolutely. For Pope Prevost, it humanizes him in a way official Vatican biographies never could. For Eastwood, it reveals a depth and thoughtfulness that goes beyond his screen persona. But more importantly, it gives the public a beautiful example of authentic connection across different worlds." Throughout the day, something interesting began to happen on social media. The hashtag #TheBridgingWorld started trending, with people sharing their own stories of unexpected friendships and connections that crossed cultural, political, or social divides. A nurse in Boston posted, "My most meaningful friendship is with a patient who has completely opposite political views. We've learned so much from each other." Bridging worlds. A teacher in London wrote, "Started a pen pal program between our wealthy school and a school in a struggling area. The friendships formed have changed both communities." Bridging worlds. By evening, major news networks were reporting on this new trend. The Eastwood-Prevost effect, they called it, a renewed interest in finding common ground with people different from ourselves. In his office at Universal Studios, film producer Mark Davidson was having an emergency meeting with his team. "Eastwood's new movie opens next week. We need to completely revise our marketing strategy. This is now the biggest thing about him." His marketing director shook her head. "He won't do it. I already called his agent. Eastwood refuses to use this story to promote the film. Says it would cheapen something important." Davidson looked frustrated but not surprised. "That's Eastwood for you. Man sticks to his principles." At a small Catholic school in Chicago, Sister Mary Frances used the story in her morning lesson. "Today, children, we're going to talk about how God can bring different people together for a purpose. Sometimes the most important connections in our lives come from unexpected places." A little boy raised his hand. "Sister, do you think Clint Eastwood will play the Pope in a movie now?" The children laughed, but Sister Mary Frances smiled thoughtfully. "I think the real story is more interesting than any movie could be." As evening fell in Rome, Pope Robert Prevost finished writing a personal letter to Clint Eastwood. He sealed it in an envelope and handed it to Father Marco. "Make sure this reaches Mr. Eastwood directly," he said. "Not through agents or assistants?" "Yes, Your Holiness," Father Marco replied. "May I ask what you wrote?" The Pope smiled gently. "Just a reminder of a promise made long ago on a church roof. Some things are meant to remain between friends." 3 days after the interview, when the media frenzy was still at its height, something unexpected happened. The small village in Peru where Eastwood and Prevost had met received a surprise delivery. A complete set of new tools and building materials, along with funding for community projects. No sender was named, but the timing left little doubt about its source. That same day, the Vatican announced a new initiative to support rural communities in Latin America, with a special focus on healthcare and education. The program would be named the Peru Project, a simple name that carried deeper meaning for those who knew the story. A week later, Eastwood's new film opened in theaters worldwide. Despite his refusal to use the Prevost connection for publicity, Ticket sales broke records. In interviews about the film, journalists inevitably asked about the Pope. Eastwood politely but firmly redirected every question back to the movie and his cast. One persistent reporter finally asked, "Mr. Eastwood, don't you want to tell more of this amazing story? People are fascinated by it." Eastwood looked at her with his characteristic intensity. "Already told what matters. Some stories don't need sequels." As the weeks passed, the media attention gradually faded, as it always does. New celebrities, new scandals, and new world events took over the headlines. But something had changed, in countless small ways. The story of an unlikely friendship between a Hollywood legend and a humble priest who became pope had left its mark. Churches reported increased attendance. Community service organizations saw a rise in volunteers, and people everywhere were looking at those different from themselves with new eyes, wondering what unexpected connections might be waiting to be found. The greatest impact, however, was something that couldn't be measured, a quiet reminder that in a world full of divisions, genuine human connection remains possible, even in the most unexpected places. And somewhere in Peru, a church stood with a strong roof, a silent testament to where it all began.